Brenda Shad, of Choctaw and Cherokee descent, studied at Sophia University in Tokyo. Discovered as a teenager in Japan, she became a standout face of the 90s, working with Elite, Ford, and Premiere, and appearing on the covers of Vogue, LA, and GQ. Later, she founded the brand Tribe of Two and has also used her platform to advocate for indigenous causes in the U.S. and abroad. Between 1893 and 1900, Gertrude Three Finger, a young Cheyenne woman, posed at W.E. Irwin's portrait studio in Chickasha, then part of Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. She wears leather adorned with elk teeth, a mark of prestige crafted through the patient work of women. Irwin was documenting life on the plains as railroads and federal agencies were moving in. In 1926, Bear Bull, Kiayi Stamik, of the Siksika Nation, appeared with his braided forelock above his forehead. Among the Blackfoot, that detail identifies the keeper of a sacred bundle connected to the thunder medicine pipe, a ceremonial set that holds powerful objects and guides inherited rituals. Bear Bull was one of Edward S. Curtis's informants on Blackfoot life. Long Wolf, an Oglala Lakota leader, Sung Manitou Hungska, died in London in 1892 of pneumonia while touring with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He was buried in Brompton, London, and remained forgotten for decades. In 1997, his family brought his remains back to Pine Ridge, South Dakota. There he was reburied, closing a chapter of the 19th century. Around 1901, Fred E. Miller, a federal employee and photographer at the Crow Agency, photographed two Apsaluk sisters on the Montana reservation, Whistler and Hit's the One Who Rides the Gray Horse. The moment captures a time of forced change, when life on the land was adjusting to reservation rules and family ties held the community together. Around 1900, Iron White Man, a Lakota Sioux, joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West. There he traveled on tours featuring parades, staged battles, and acts that mixed business with politics. His portrait by Gertrude Casimir helped preserve his image while the show packed arenas across the U.S. and Europe, including London and Paris. For the Crow, Apsaluk, leaders like Plenty Coups reminded people that the ground we walk on holds the traces of war, mourning, and learning. It's a place of living memory. It's not just land. It's an inheritance made of blood, sweat, and stories that sustain us today, call for respect with every step, and demand that we care together for what we've been given to carry forward. To avoid inbreeding, indigenous peoples traded dogs between villages and across long routes. This movement refreshed the gene pool and followed migration and trade networks. Before European colonization, it shaped a wide range of diversity. Afterward, many lineages were replaced, but ancient traces still show up in archaeological and genetic records. In 1880, L.A. Huffman, newly arrived at Fort Keogh in eastern Montana, photographed two Lakota children in a studio pose. The boy holds a bow and arrows. The girl wears a hairpipe necklace, leggings, and decorated moccasins. It was one of the first photos he made there after taking on the role of post photographer at the fort, which had been established after Little Bighorn. On July 24, 1953, star Marilyn Monroe stopped in Vancouver on her way to film River of No Return in the Rocky Mountains. At the Capilano Reserve, she was introduced to Squamish chief Matthias Joe, son of the well-known Joe Capilano, in a brief meeting that came to symbolize Hollywood's fascination with local culture. It quickly made headlines in the city. In the 1880s, Spotted Tail, Singte Gleska, a Brule Lakota chief, chose negotiation over war and took his people's concerns to Washington. In 1881, he was killed by Crow Dog. The case led to ex parte Crow Dog in the Supreme Court, which reaffirmed tribal authority over crimes on their own lands. An uncle of Crazy Horse, he served as a bridge between federal agents and Lakota leaders. In 1901, at Fort Hall near Pocatello, a northern Shoshone family poses. The reservation on the Snake River Plain and guaranteed by the Fort Bridger Treaty of 1868 brought together the Shoshone and Bannock peoples. On their faces, the transition. Tribal life and U.S. rules collide. Federal land laws and schools were changing daily routines. Hunting and rituals struggled to find their place. Separated from the Shoshone, Comanche groups left the Wyoming region in the late 1600s and pushed into the southern plains. With horses and buffalo hunting, they took over territory that had been Apache before and created the Comancheria, an area that covered West Texas and parts of New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Colorado. They made contact with the Spanish and dominated trade routes. Late 1920s, Northern Cheyenne Reservation, Montana. The tribe was living decades after the reservation was created in 1884 and at the height of the assimilation schools. The woman holds a cane. The scarf has beadwork designs, Plains art. Her gaze tells of journeys between the Tongue River and nights of stories kept alive despite outside pressure. Early 20th century, an Oglala Lakota woman poses in Pine Ridge in the Great Plains. Braids, beads, and fabrics show family work. The reservation was born after the Fort Laramie Treaty and years of U.S. pressure. Women managed food, home, and belongings. Between losses and adaptation, she faces the camera as if saying, "We're still here." The Shoshone, who call themselves New, came from the Great Basin and over time moved north and east. In the 16th century, some crossed the Rocky Mountains, adopted the horse, and reached the plains. Later, pressure from other peoples pushed them back to Idaho and Wyoming, where today they maintain reservations and eastern, northern, and western branches. 1930s, crowded platform. An Indigenous woman and her son wait for the train. In the middle of the Great Depression, stations were stopovers to look for work and reconnect with family, with railroads in crisis and people traveling on the cheap, while the government was changing its policy toward Native peoples with the 1934 law. Dan George, born Geswanuth Slahut, led the Tsleil-Waututh Nation from 1951 to 1963 on the Vancouver coast. At 60, he got into acting and soon stood out in Little Big Man, which earned him an Oscar nomination. In 1967, his Lament for Confederation speech brought the country's silenced Indigenous history to light. He was also an author and poet. Lucy Thompson was born in Pequon, on the Klamath River, and grew up between Yurok rituals and English. In 1916, she wrote to the American Indian to record the laws, stories, and struggles of her people, and to denounce massacres in California. Married to Jim Thompson, she kept defending the region's river and salmon. In 1992, her work received the American Book Award. Born in Eufaula, Oklahoma in 1882, Cianina Red Feather Blackstone of the Muskogee Nation became a well-known voice on stages across the U.S. and Europe. She sang the songs of Charles Wakefield Cadman, inspired the opera Chenoweth, boosted troop morale in World War I, and after 1935 focused on Indigenous education. She died in 1985, leaving a legacy that still resonates. The Bannock, relatives of the northern Paiute, migrated to the Snake River and connected with the Shoshone, adopting horses and buffalo hunting. In the summer, they went to Shoshone Falls to fish for salmon. With the creation of the Fort Hall Reservation, the pace of life changed, and their autonomy shrank in the Great Basin, southeastern Oregon, and southern Idaho over the 19th century. Awe-Ayu, called Pretty Flower, was Seneca, an Iroquois people known as the Keepers of the Western Door. In the early 20th century, her community lived south of Lake Ontario, in longhouses and matrilineal clans. Her name showed up on cards and records from 1908, echoing Haudenosaunee history and its changes in New York State. In 1872, an Arapaho man faces a changing country. After Sand Creek, his people, allies of the Cheyenne, signed treaties like Fort Laramie and are pushed into agencies in Indian Territory. A few years later, some would be escorted to Wind River in Wyoming, and others to Darlington near Fort Reno in present-day Oklahoma. In 1908, in northern Minnesota, an Anishinaabe man paddles in silence and lifts a birch bark trumpet to his lips. The elk call. The scene, captured by Roland W. Reed, echoes a hunting method that mimicked the animal's bugle to draw it to the shore, at a time when tradition and landscape still guided life on the lake at dusk. In 1906, a Caddo group experiences a turning point that reshapes their world. After centuries between the valleys of the Red and the Sabine, corn farmers and skilled potters, They face land allotment that pushes families onto individual plots on the eve of Oklahoma statehood. Old trade gives way to U.S. rules, but the collective memory endures. Wyoming, around 1870, among portable buffalo hide tipis, the chief's shelter served as a council and decision-making base. The eastern Shoshone, led by Washakie, had the camp arranged in a circle facing east, already going through the forced transition to the Wind River Reservation territory after the Fort Bridger Treaty. In 1898, Hakasnaka, called Little Chief, posed in Omaha during the Indian Congress at the Trans-Mississippi Exposition in a studio at the fair. Frank A. Reinhardt with Adolph F. Muir photographed leaders from dozens of nations. These portraits show how the Arapaho presented themselves to the public amid federal policies toward indigenous peoples. Explorers called them Pima, but they call themselves Akamal-o-Odom, the river people. They descend from the Hohokam, who built vast canals in the Sonoran Desert and made the water flow in Arizona. In 1870, Carlo Gentile documented this community, an echo of a past that's still alive along the Gila and Salt, living tradition in festivals and in the language.